Evening, everybody. Shalom Aleichem. First thing is this shir is sponsored. This chusar for Shlema. For Rav Moshe Elazar ben Miriam, should have for Shlema. Also wishing for Shlema to Moshe Aaron ben Henshu. Thank you as well to Pinchas Chain from Chain Insurance. And of course, a special thank you to behind the camera to Aviv Stein, dynamicslideshows.com for the video. Yesher koyach. Very much appreciated. Next week's shir is also going to be on Tuesday, Mir Hashem, same time. And the shir can be seen live if you don't, if you miss it. It's on the yeshiva.net. It's also on Mayan Yisroel.net. If anyone's able to help by sponsoring, please let me know. We would very much appreciate it. And also on the tables, there's the dinner ad blanks coming up, groundbreaking dinner of Mayan Yisroel on June 9 on the Chodesh Tammuz. Take a look if you could. And finally, there's source sheets on the tables, so that's the source sheets we're going to be using today. And without further ado, Rabbi Jacobson, Yesher koyach.
Why is my life a roller coaster? Shammai and Hillel explain to a convert the beauty of a tumultuous life. That's the theme we're going to explore this evening. Let's begin with the very interesting mitzvah in the beginning of this week's Parsha Bahaloischa, that the menorah had to be Miksha Achas Zahav Tahir. Unlike most pieces of furniture in the Mishkan and later in the Beis Hamikdash, which could bring together various pieces of metal, of gold, of silver together, the menorah, just like the kruvim and the chatzotzros, those were the only three utensils, the only three kelim that had to be miksha, meaning it was made of one piece of gold that was then hammered out and branched out, which made it, of course, very complex. Because if you take separate pieces, you weld them together, it's a much easier project than taking one large piece of gold and hammering it out literally to form the entire candelabra with all of its intricate details, far more intricate than any other piece of furniture in the Mishkan. And yet, concerning the menorah, not the aray, not the shulchan, not the mizbeach, concerning the menorah, there was this mitzvah, this instruction, it had to be miksha. So, let's open up with a story that the Gemara tells us in Masechta Shabbos, Daf Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph. It's in your sources, source number 1. It's a very famous story. But today, we're going to explore it one step deeper. The Gemara tells the story about Shuv Maisa Benochri Echad Shebo Lifnei Shammai. A Gentile comes to Shammai, Shammai Hazokein. Omar le, he tells him, Gaireini, convert me. I want to become a Jew. But al menashe telamdeni kol haTorah kula k'shani yomed al regel achas. I will convert with a condition. Teach me the entire Torah as I'm standing on one leg. How long can a person stand on one leg? 20 seconds, 30 seconds, if you're really good, 2 minutes. So teach me all of Judaism al regel achas, on one foot. Dochafoy ba'amas habinyan shebiyadoi. Shammai was holding an amas habinyan, a measuring stick, which was used by contractors to measure size of karka, of real estate. Shammai was holding one of those measuring sticks called amas habinyan, and he rejects the person. He pushes him away. Bolifnei Hillel, he comes to Hillel. Gaire, Hillel accepted him. Amar Lai, Hillel told him, Da'alach sani lechavrach loy savid, zui kol haTorah kula, v'idach pirushahu zil gemar. The whole Torah constitutes of one message, what you dislike to be done to you. Don't do to somebody else, that's the whole Torah. Everything else is commentary, pirusha. It's commentary on this statement. Now go study the commentary. You may spend 90 years studying the commentary, but you got the message. What you dislike to be done to you, don't do to anybody else. And that's the end of that episode. in Masechta Shabbos Daf Lamed Aleph. The questions on the story are numerous, but let's mention a few of the known ones. Number one, the question would be, why did Shammai push him away where Hillel embraced him? Especially Shammai is the one who in Pirkei Avos Perek Aleph, at the end of Perek Aleph, Shammai Azakin says, V'hevei mekabelis kol ha'adam b'sever panim yafas. Welcome every single human being with a pleasant demeanor, and yet he himself, who said accept and welcome every person b'sever panim yafas, doesn't even bother to explain this person his mistake. He takes his measuring stick and he rejects him. Number one. Number two, Chazal were extremely meticulous in their words. Why is it necessary to know that it happens to be that Shammai was a contractor, and it happens to be that he was holding Amas Habinyan for whatever reason. He was probably sitting in Beis Medrash. Why he was holding the contractor's stick is another question, but he was holding it. Is that really necessary to emphasize what's the detail? Why is it necessary to emphasize this detail? Rather than tell him he didn't accept him, he sent him away. He said, this is not for you. Leave me alone. I have no time. This is not the way to do it. When Hillel accepts him, Hillel could have said, what's kol ha-Torah kula v'hafta l'recha kamoicha? As Rabbi Akiva says, Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. But Hillel doesn't say that. Rabbi Akiva would say that generations later. Rabbi Akiva was after the Churban, Hillel was before the Churban. But Hillel gives it in a negative way. What you dislike to be done to you, don't do it to anybody else. Hillel could have said, V'hafta l'recha kamoicha, love your fellow like yourself, that's the Torah, and everything else is commentary. Why does Hillel express it in this roundabout fashion, in a lashon of shlila, of negative, rather than in a lashon of chiyuv, of positive? So we raised three questions. Number one, why does Shammai reject him? Especially when he's the one who says, welcome everybody b'sever panim yafas. And by the way, he mentions kol ha'adam. The Gemara says in Yavam is the opinion of Reb Shimon bar Yochai, atem kruyim adam ve'enu masaylim kruyim adam. So Tosfos says they write on the spot that ha'adam includes everybody. Ha'adam includes Jew and Gentile. Shammai says, having mekabelas kol ha'adam, every single human being you should welcome with a pleasant, calm, relaxed, warm, nurturing demeanor and face. And yet he behaves the exact opposite of what he preaches in Pirkei Avos. Number two, why is it necessary to say it was Ba'amas HaBinyan? And number three, why does Hillel convey the main message of Judaism not in a positive fashion, V'hafta l'recha kamoicha, but rather what you hate, what you dislike for yourself, don't do to others. So there are many interpretations on this Gemara. Tonight we are going to explore one interpretation that was presented by the Mezritcher Maggid. The Mezritcher Maggid, his name was Rabbi Doiv Ber. He was the primary pupil of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Chassidus, and when the Baal Shem Tov passed away on Shavuos, Tov Kuf Chaf, 1760, 1 year later, the Mezritcher Maggid, the preacher of Mezritch, a city in Volin, succeeded him, and he passed away 13 years later, Yutes Kislev Tovkuf Lamed Gimel, Yat Kislev Tovkuf Lamed Gimel, which is 1772. The Mezritcher Maggid's Torahs are compiled in a sefer called Oir Torah, the Light of Torah. In it, he presents a classic, Hasidic, spiritual, mystical, psychological interpretation to this story, which is in your source number 2. But let me give an introduction to be able to appreciate the theme that he is presenting. He says, when this person came to Shammai and said, teach me the whole Torah, kshani oimid al regel achas, when I'm standing on one leg, it means more than give me the short version of Judaism. By the way, today I think many Jewish websites attempt to do just this. They promise their visitors, here, watch this video, And in 3 minutes, you'll know everything there is to know about life. In 3 minutes, you'll know everything you have to know about being a parent, about being a husband, about being a wife, about being a mensch, about becoming a billionaire overnight, about becoming a gone oilam, whatever you need. This 3-minute video, especially if it involves a credit card transaction, will give you access to everything. But according to the Maggid, when he says, give me the Torah, teach me Torah al regel achas, he's actually referring to something deeper, on a more emotional, existential, psychological, spiritual level. What he is addressing is the fact that seldom do we find a life that is characterized by absolute stability. What the Mezritcher Maggid calls regel achas, a life that has a single, stable leg and foundation that doesn't change. You're on solid ground, you're on solid footing, and it remains uniform, singular, consistent throughout your life. But life is not like that. The most stable and consistent people have their moments of inconsistency, and many people, you can't even call them consistent and stable people. We have ups and downs. Life is a roller coaster. In the best of situations. Certainly when life has its curveballs and challenges. And the roller coaster is both from circumstances outside of us, and even more importantly, perhaps from within. Even if the circumstances around you, Baruch Hashem, are wonderful, are lovely, and that itself is not a simple task. But within, the inner heart, the Chayvus Halavavis writes the story about the king who came back from war, a massive war, and the Chacham, the great sage, meets him and says, welcome home from the small war, and welcome back to the Titanic, to the large war. He says, what? And he explains to him the large war internally. They tell the story about a Jew from Chelm, in the Polish city of Chelm, who goes to Vilna, in Lithuania, and he wants to meet, the vibrant Jews living in Vilna, which was known as Yerushalayim Delita, the Jerusalem of Lithuania. Comes into the Beis Medrash, looks around, Chapsa Shmuas, comes back to Chelm. They say, "Nu, what did you see in Vilna?" So I walk into the Beis Medrash there. I meet a Jew who's an atheist, a Jew who's an agnostic, a Jew who's a believer, a right-winger, a left-winger, a socialist, a communist, a capitalist, a Zionist, a Bundist, an apikoidus, a chatzi apikoidus, a koifer beikir, a koifer chatzi koifer beikir. So the guy tells him, he says, I don't understand. In Chelm we also have all these types of Jews. He says, no, you don't understand. It was all the same person. And that's the story of life. The story of life is between our moods, between our emotions, the fluctuating dynamics in the roller coaster of the human psyche are very intense. That's true concerning any life. It becomes even more true concerning somebody who tries to be an Oved Hashem. Somebody who actually, in the words of the Rambam at the end of Hilchas Shmita v'Yovel, the last set of halachas of Sefer Zroyim in the Rambam is Shmita and Yovel. And his last halacha, the Rambam, has tremendous words there where he says, Lo shevet levi bilvad, elekol ish v'ish asher nodver ruchay oisoi, vehevinoi madoi lihibodel, liyos kodesh kadosh, niskadesh kodesh kadosh. He describes that what the Torah speaks of Shevet Levi applies to every person who becomes conscious and decides to dedicate his life to serve God. And in the life of an Oved Hashem, this facet, this quality, is even more intense. The extremes in people's lives. One day I'm inspired, I'm motivated, I have spiritual clarity, I am optimistic, I'm full of hope, I have the stamina, the adrenaline to fight my negativity, to fight my apathy, my laziness, my sluggishness, my narcissism, and add any adjective that is applicable to you. And then other days, I experience the exact opposite. And that, in the words of the Pasuk, Sheva Yipoel Tzadik, become. Even the Tzadik falls 7 times before he rises. This is true even the Tzadik, certainly not the Tzadik. So this man comes to Shammai and says, I want to be a Jew. And I want to be a real Jew. But I want it regel achas. I want stability. I want consistency. I want to just always be up to it. Why? I don't want to have those days, those nights, where I experience such tumultuous emotions and psychological patterns, literally like a roller coaster. I don't want it. I want regel achas. That's what he asks of him. Shammai doesn't reject him. Shammai doesn't throw him out. Shammai says, "Have you mekabelis kol adam b'seiv upon him yafos." But Shammai, in his own inimitable style, explains to him how his request is not possible to achieve. And Hillel will not contradict Shammai, but Hillel will, in his own inimitable style, bring it home to this potential convert and illustrate to him the problem in his request. What did Shammai explain to him? Now let's look inside and see it in the words of whoever transcribed this Torah of the Maggid. He didn't transcribe his own Torah. It was usually one of the students who transcribed it. And let's see what he says. On the second line of this source of our Torah, he says, "V'yesh lefarish al pi ma she'amru Razal lo higle HaKadosh Baruch Hu es Yisrael ela lo hisif aleim geirim." The Gemara says Hashem did not send the Jews to exile only to increase geirim to the Jewish world, converts. It's a very strange Maimon Chazal, because throughout Jewish history, we know we have not had such an increase of geirim, and not only that, it runs contrary to our mission statement. Halachically, we are instructed not to proselytize, not to convert, and not only in days when it was dangerous, even when it's not dangerous. The Rambam paskins in Hilchos Malachim Chassidei Umas Ha'olam Yesh Lam Chelek L'Olam Haba. There's no need to become a Jew in order to experience your part in the world to come. We completely reject the notion that there's no salvation outside of the church, as some other religions advocate, and the Jewish people have suffered the brunt of that faith. There's no salvation outside of Christianity or outside of Islam, etc. Judaism completely rejected that. So what does the Gemara mean? We went into exile just to add geirim? We never searched for geirim. We're not interested in geirim. We believe that the way you were created is by particular divine providence, and for you to achieve your perfection in the world, you need to be you and not somebody else. And if you were created a Jew, be a Jew, and if you were created not a Jew, be a non-Jew. And you could be a wonderful person and achieve your maximum potential and fulfill your mission for which your soul came down into the world. So the Maggid explains, Lohisif aleim geirim represents a spiritual idea. Ki hatzadik roitz aliyas b'madrega shaloi tamid, ki roitz aliyas tamid b'fnei adonav l'sharsa. The righteous Jew wants to always remain in a spiritual, lofty, transparent state, because he always wants to be in the presence of his master to serve him. So he wants to have that consciousness, that conviction, that state of mind, state of heart, in which he's in the presence of his master serving him. And yet, despite his desire, even the tzaddik sometimes has a nefila. He falls from his lofty madrega, and he loses it. His mind is not the same, his heart is not the same, his soul is not the same. The nefila for every person is a different type of nefila, but the common quality is it's a nefila. It's a spiritual, psychological downfall. He is falling because he has to sublimate sparks. And these sparks that fell into the klipos, which literally means shells, the husks of the world, he is, or she is, called on to sublimate. And he gives a story, a metaphor, a parable. The monarch, the king, sends his son on a shlichus, the prince, to bring a treasure back. He once had a treasure and he lost it. And he asks his son to bring back this treasure. But here's the catch. The treasure is not in the basement of the home or the attic of the palace. It's not even in another neighborhood. It's in another hostile foreign country where the prince, as a son of this monarch, cannot go freely. So the prince must disguise himself. He must camouflage his identity. He has to change his clothes so they don't recognize who he is. So they allow him into the other town, into the other country, where he can retrieve that treasure and bring it back to his father. So now he dresses up like a different person. He doesn't look anymore like the prince. He now camouflages himself. He has a whole different dress. And when you look at him, he looks like a citizen of the other country, of the enemy actually. And through this, he develops a deeper connection with the king. Then there was connection before when he stood in the presence of the king. By going out, by dressing up in different clothes and bringing that treasure, he serves the king in a far profounder way. And these sparks are called geirim. Like Yisroel, Jews were exiled, that in every situation, in every place, there's the treasure that they pick up, they sublimate. The Geir says, I want to learn the whole Torah when I'm standing on one foot. I want to remain stable. I want to remain on one solid level, in one solid state that is consistent and permanent and reliable. Shammai pushes him away with the contractor's building stick. Hu Zayin Yemei Habinyan. In Sefer Yetzirah, one of the earliest Kabbalistic works, there is a term known as Shivas Yemei Habinyan, the 7 days of construction, referring to the 7 days of creation in Bereshis. The Zohar says that each one of the 7 days corresponds to one of the 7 emotions. That's why the pasuk says Sheishis Yamim Asa Hashem Es Hashemayim V'Saaretz, and the Zohar says it should have said B'Sheishis Yamim, during 6 days. It's not 6 days he made, during 6 days, and the Zohar says no, Sheishis Yamim Asa Hashemayim V'Saaretz. 6 days Hashem made, because these are the 6 emotions: Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yisoid, and Shabbos is Malchus. The 7 basic building blocks of creation. Each day corresponds to one of those Shivas Yemei Habinyan. Dochafay ba'amas habinyan ki b'chol echad yesh boiker v'erev. Vayi erev vayi voiker yoyim echad. Each day of the 7 days is made up of a night and made up of a day. Vayi erev vayi voiker. There's Ma'ariv and there's Shacharis. Bereisha chashoiche v'hadar nahar. There's night and there's day. There's darkness and there's light. Ki b'chol echad yesh boiker v'erev. And therefore in every person, and in each one of the 7 emotions, and in each one of the 7 days of creation, there's always an erev, a night, and a morning. Hu b'toiv v'ra, or nusachache v'toiv v'ra. There's always the negativity, the darkness, and there's always the goodness. Im kein tzorich ha tzadik leidet b'madregasa l'pa'amim b'chdei levare nitzutzus elu shenoflu b'klippus. And thus, the tzaddik must sometimes descend in order to sublimate those sparks, the vahierev, those sparks that fell into the shells. He has to sublimate. What is the Mezritcha Magid explaining? There is a famous interpretation of the Baal Shem Tov, his Rebbe, that's brought in the Baal Shem Tov al Torah Parshas Acharei Mos. The Baal Shem Tov once said, the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah Daf Chav Tes, Kol mi she'enoi mechuyev b'davar enoi moitzias harabim yidei chivasai. Somebody who is not obligated in a mitzvah cannot exempt the public in their mitzvah. For example, in shofar, if you are not obligated, if a child blows shofar, so even though he blows the shofar according to all the instructions, he can't be moitzi as harabim yidei chivasai, and be moitzi somebody who is obligated min haTorah in shofar, because in order to fulfill, to dispense somebody else from their obligation, you yourself have to be obligated. So the Baal Shem Tov asks, why doesn't it say Kol mi she'enoi chayav b'davar? What's mechuyav? And the Baal Shem Tov answers that there is also a deeper mystical Hasidic interpretation, homiletical interpretation, al derech haremes, and that is Kol mi she'enoi mechuyav b'davar enei moitzias harabim yedei chavas. If you want to be moitzias harabim, if you want to take out the rabbim, if you want to lift up people from chayvason, from their chay, from their guilt, from their challenges, from their tension, kol mi she'enoi mechuyav b'davar. If you yourself are not guilty with that thing, einoi moitzias harabim yedei chavas, because you cannot relate to the people. In order to be able to help another human being who has challenges, who has tension, if you want to remain on your mountain on top, you want to remain lofty and aloof, elevated and inspired, there's no point of contact between you and the person who needs to be elevated, and therefore you will not be able to help them. Kol mi she'enoi mechuyav b'davar. You yourself have to be somewhat mechuyav as yotza chayav b'dinoi, a little guilty. You have to be a little tainted in order to be able to relate. And he gives the metaphor. If somebody is submerged in quagmire, if somebody is submerged in mud and dirt, and I say, I'm wearing a beautiful suit, and I'm sitting at a beautiful table, but I'll pray for you, I'll call out to you. That's not enough. If I want to schlep the person out, I have to go down and lift him up. But in order to go down and lift him up, I'm going to get dirty. I can't get so dirty that I should myself sink and then somebody else has to come get me. But if I'm not willing to get down and dirty on some level, I can't really help the person. The Baal Shem Tov once said that the task of a real teacher, a real communicator, he also said a real cantor, and a real doirish barabim, somebody who teaches, who inspires, he has to be, he said, like a menorah v'chatzina, like a broom. A broom, you take a lovely broom, and you finish sweeping up the kitchen or the dining room, what happens? The floor is spotless. Where did all the dirt go? The dirt didn't disappear, it went into the broom. They say there was once a woman who came to a rabbi, and she tells the rabbi, she says, I have terrible tzadas problems. He says, go ahead, share it with me. So she talks for 3.5 hours. She finishes. She turns to him and she says, not only are you a kind person, you're also a balmoifus. You make miracles. He says, why do you say so? She said, I came into this office with a migraine headache. And now it disappeared. He tells her it didn't disappear. It was just transferred from you to me. So what happens with a broom? The broom, the dirt didn't disappear. The broom absorbed all the dirt. And the Baal Shem Tov said that a real speaker, a real teacher, a real communicator, what he does is he cleans up the olam, he cleans out everything, he goes in, takes a broom, cleans out the mess, removes the filth, removes the dirt, and where does it go? Where does it go? He has a nefillah in the process. He has to have a nefillah in the process. He falls in the process because that's the only way that he can actually or she can have a real powerful impact. What is more, one of the Hillel Rebbe of Kamarna Svarim, he writes, Pelodic thing, very powerful insight. He says that the Gemara says in Masechta Shabbos, Daf Kuf Hey, Hameshaber Kelav Bachamasa Yeheba Inecha Ka'ovid Avodah Zarah. If somebody in his wrath takes and breaks a kalim, he breaks furniture, he breaks vessels, he breaks utensils, it's a form of idolatry where he loses control. He doesn't have the presence of Yireh Shamayim. He becomes insane, he becomes angry, he breaks things. It's a form of idolatry. It's like the Gemara says, Kol hakoyos kilu oved avodah zarah. There's different explanations. One of the explanations the Baal Tanya explains in Tanya Geras HaKodesh Schafei is because if he would have been aware that everything ultimately in life comes from Hashem, and even if a person chose badly, but if Hashem wouldn't want this to happen, it would have not happened. So he wouldn't get so angry. It would be like you stub your finger, you stub your finger in the door. So a child, you hit the door and he feels very comforted. You hit the door and you say, don't do this, don't do this. But an adult understands you don't have the door to blame. You're getting so angry at a person. Why are you getting so angry? Because you attribute power to them that they don't really have. It's the door. If Hashem did not want this should happen to you, to happen to me would have not happened. It happened through this person. He's nena sharoya b'chirasai. He made a bad choice. But harbe shluchim lamakayim. There could have been other messengers through which this aggravation would come to me. So Hamashaber Kalim b'chamasai, the Gemara says, you break Kalim in anger. Says the Kamarner, I guess only he could say this. Moshe had luchas, the most expensive Kalim in the world. V'haluchas ma'aseh lekim hema, v'hamichtav michtav elekimhu. And what did he do? Moshe got upset. I came down from the mountain. I saw the calf. What did I do? I took the etfa, he says, haluchas b'shtei yadeh, he says in Parshas Eikev, v'ashabreim le'einechem. Says the Helike Kamarner. Why? You know why? Because the Jews became Oivdei Avodah Zarah. And Moshe decided I have to elevate them and liberate them and uplift them and redeem them. But Moshe's on a mountain. Moshe Rabbeinu. How can he relate to Oivdei Avodah Zarah? He had to be Meshaber Kelim B'chamasai. Which, you can't compare that to the Chet HaEgel, but there had to be some correlation, some relationship, some empathy, some identification, some nefila in the life of Moshe Rabbeinu in order to be able to relate and in order to be able to then uplift them from the mud, from the filth, and bring them back to their pristine source. And as always, every Hasidic idea you could find in a Chazal, the Gemara says in Yerushalmi, in Tainus, Perek Zayin, about Shmuel Hanavi, Amar Reb Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, Lava Shmuel Chalukon shall call Yisrael. When Shmuel Hanavi wanted to defend the Jewish people, the way Chazal expressed it is, Shmuel Hanavi donned the Chalukon, the tunic, the shirt, the levush of Klal Yisrael. Like the Mezritcha Maggid says, the prince has to put on different garments. So this is a different spin on his nefilah. He fell down spiritually. He doesn't have the same chayas, the same as slavas, the same as oirus. This is a sign he left the king. Says the Maggid, no, he didn't leave the king. He's actually connecting to the king in a much deeper way. He's now on a mission. And the mission is there are many sparks that have fallen down. And the only way he could be moitzi sarab, he can bring them, he can uplift them, he can elevate them, is he has to become a mechuyev b'davar. So he has to look differently, he has to feel differently, he has to go down into that world, and therefore even the tzaddik experiences a downfall, and in that process, if he works it through, in that process he gets to bring the treasure that was lost from Hashem back to the source. But the son, the prince, must dress up in different clothes. If he doesn't dress up in different clothes, he simply cannot accomplish it. So, Shammai says, there's an Amas HaBinyan, there's 7 midos, there's always Erev and Boiker, that's the structure, and therefore, there's no regalach. So Shammai told him that it is impossible. And then Hillel explained it to him. And this is what he says, the last piece. V'Hillel omar loy, madalach sani lechavrach loy savet. Listen to this. Pirush. Ilu loy nafal hatzadik mimadrega shaloi, loy hoya lecha aliyah. Im kein madalach sani, lechavrach nami loy savet. What Hillel told this person is, think about yourself. Where were you yesterday? Where were you last month? You were one of these sparks. You weren't Jewish. You were one of these sparks that found themselves in the shells. Today you come and you say, I want Torah. How did that happen? How did you get out of it? You know why? Because there was a Jew who had a nefila. There was a Jew who fell down spiritually. There was a Jew who lost his relationship. There was a Jew who looks at himself in the mirror and he sees he's not wearing the clothes of the prince. He doesn't even recognize himself as a child of Hashem. He fell. Because he was sent to bring back you, to bring you back, to retrieve the lost treasure. Somebody went through a nefila in order to retrieve you. So why are you here today? Because there was somebody who lost his spiritual stability. Madalach sani. What you dislike to be done to you, lechavrach lo yisaved. Now you say, I want to be a Jew and I don't want any nephilas? If everybody would have said that, you would never be here today. The only reason you're here today is because somebody had a nephila. Those are his words. Madalach sani, if not for that nephila, lo yhaya lecha aliyah. You would have never been here. Lechavrach lo yisaved. How do you now ask and say, but I want a Judaism in which there's no nephila? If there would be no nephila, you would also not have an aliyah. That's what Hillel tells the ger in a continuation to what Shammai is telling him. What does this mean? This means in every person's life, we sometimes have to be able to look at our inconsistencies, at our tremendous, tumultuous patterns in life, the roller coasters, the waves. Sometimes you have life is placid and relaxed and serene and tranquil. Baruch Hashem, Tavi Alecha Bracha. But we know that lasts for a little while and there's a nefila. And sometimes we learn here there's a deeper perspective. And that is, don't just look at it from my own point of view. Oh, yesterday I was inspired. Today I couldn't care less. Today I'm numb, I'm cold, I'm frozen, I'm soulless, I'm lifeless. They once asked a Jew, what's the difference between ignorance and apathy? He said, I don't know and I don't care. Yesterday I knew and I cared, and today I don't know and I don't care. And we often look at ourselves, and you'll go to your Rav, or you'll go to your Mashpia, you'll go to your Mashgiach, or you'll go to your, whoever it is, you'll go to yourself, and you'll say, Lama, what happened to me? You know, why am I so meshuga? Why am I so tzedreit? Why can't I be consistent for more than 3 hours, you know? Or for more than a week, or more than a month, or kol chada from shura delay. Sometimes you have to be able to look at it from a cosmic point of view. You have to get out of your own box, of your own shell, and see what is actually happening here. What may be happening is that you get into a bad mood. Well, sometimes you get into a bad mood because you didn't eat. Sometimes you get into a bad mood because you didn't sleep. Sometimes you get into a bad mood because of a combination of a few things. But sometimes there's something deeper going on. The reason you get into a bad mood is because there's somebody who's in a state, in a fallen state. And your soul is linked to that person. It may be somebody you know. It may be somebody you don't know. And part of your mission is to help that person in that state. But you can't. You're in a good place. You're up there. They say there was once a psychiatrist, a new psychiatrist in the block. He got his training. He graduated. His first day in the office, he came in, and patients started to come in at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they left 7 o'clock in the evening. So for 10 hours, he was listening to patients. And you know, when you really listen to people for 10 hours, if anybody here does it, it's not the easiest thing to do. So after 10 hours, it's now in the evening, he's leaving the office, and he meets Dr. Plotkin. Dr. Plotkin is a psychiatrist for 55 years. In that office, he turns to him and says, Dr. Plotkin, it's my first day on the job. Ich ver meshug, I want to kill myself. 55 years. Dr. Plotkin says, what's the problem? He says, people came in all day, and I'm listening to one story after another story, one sob episode after another sob episode. Dr. Plotkin, how are you doing this for 55 years? He looks at him and he says, who's listening? In order to listen and in order to relate, they say a Maisa about the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe is known as the Rebbe Maharash, Rebbe Shmuel of Lubavitch, the youngest son of the Tzemach Tzedek, the grandson of the Balatanya. So we had a process known as Yechidus, where people would come for private audiences. In the middle of Yechidus, he would constantly give his gabbai, the clothes that he was wearing, it was soaking wet, to bring him a set of new clothes, dry clothes. And once the gabbai says, Rabbi, I don't understand. You know, it feels like these clothes were submerged in a mikveh for a week. Why are you sweating so much? And the Rebbe Maharash, Reb Shmuel, explained to him. He said, when somebody comes into me to share their problem, I cannot remain dressed in my own clothes. Because if I remain dressed in my own clothes, I can't really understand what their problem is. Because I am I. How can I understand what you're going through? So I have to remove my clothes and I have to put on his clothes. I have to put on the other person's garments. I have to put on the other person's glasses. I have to put on their shoes. I have to don their perspective, their hashkafas olam, in order to be able to understand where they're coming from. And now I could listen to their question, to their dilemma, to their problem. Now they finish saying their problem. I have to answer them. If I remain in their clothes, I can't give them an answer because they're the ones who have the problem. They came to me. So I have to now remove their clothes and put back on my clothes. So from that perspective, I can give them an answer. Now they come to the next question. I have to remove my clothes again and put on their clothes again. And then for the answer, I have to remove it back, and so on and so forth. If it's 20 questions or 10 questions, I'm changing my clothes back and forth the whole time. And then the next person again, he says, now imagine if within an hour, hundreds of times you had to change your clothes, you don't think they would be sweating. And if that's true when it comes to changing physical clothes, how much more so when it comes to changing emotional and spiritual clothes. So I am now in a bad mood. Don't always look at it from your own perspective. See, there's a bigger picture. There may be some spiritual friend that I have. Maybe a family member. Maybe somebody I'm connected to in this world, in the next world, in Agil. I don't know. Who's fell. And if I don't fall, if I don't get wet, if I don't get dirty, if I don't experience something of their experience, I am not in the position of lifting them up. I have to jump into the water to schlep the person who was swept with the waves. I have to go into the mud to take the person who's sinking in the mud. I have to go in, I have to get dirty. The broom cannot clean the kitchen floor if it wants to remain spotless. If you want to remain spotless, remain in the store on the shelf. If you want to clean the floor, you have to be ready to get dirty. That's why I had a nefillah. So what's my job now? My job is not to get depressed over the fact that I'm depressed. My job is to say that even though I had a nefillah, even though I'm in a bad mood, I have to keep on trucking. I have to remain loyal. I have to remain committed. I have to do what I have to do. And that helps that person come out of his nefillah. It may be also that I am suddenly in a bad mood because I'm connected to somebody who went through something difficult, and that affected me, and that's why I'm in a bad mood. And that itself allows me to help the person in that situation. Sometimes it's the other way, by the way. Sometimes, you don't know why, but you're feeling, Reb Nachman of Breslov talks about this. Sometimes you're feeling an aliyah, you feel uplifted, you don't know why. You don't know why. And the reason is, it could be that a person you're connected to just experienced an ascent in life. And therefore it affects you in the positive sense. It works both ways. Your nefillah can affect me, I have a nefillah. Your aliyah can affect me, I have an aliyah. And when your nefillah affects me, I have a nefillah. I am connected to you, and that also means I fix you, and that's why I also have to have a nefillah. And therefore, don't get deterred, he tells the ger. Don't think that Yiddishkeit is only about what? You're always consistent and stable. There's a larger picture. There are deeper connections. Think out of your own narcissistic box, even your own narcissistic spiritual box. Don't get nispol, don't get deterred, don't get frustrated by your frustration. Rather, this is your moment when you were sent to enemy territory, you're camouflaged, you don't recognize yourself, there's a treasure waiting for you that you have to bring back to the king, and therefore, in this moment, you might be much closer to the king than the moment you looked like the prince, because now you're retrieving for him a treasure that was lost, which could not be achieved if you remain in the palace. For this, you have to, Moshe Rabbeinu breaks the luchas, he goes down, but he's bringing back Klal Yisrael to their Father in heaven. To understand this one step deeper, we'll now understand the idea of Miksha. This whole idea is in the Miksha of the menorah. We asked the question, why couldn't the menorah be made far simpler? The menorah was such a complicated piece of furniture between the gviyim and the kaftorim and the prochim, between the goblets and the flowers and the kaftorim, the buttons, mishukadim, the 7 branches, a complicated piece of furniture. Why couldn't the menorah be made in a far simpler fashion? You make separate pieces, and then you connect them together. It has to be Miksha. The answer is, this is the backdrop of the whole explanation that the Maggid is making here in our Torah. And now you'll take a look in source number 3. This is in Likutei Torah. We have here 3 generations. To the student of the Maggid, the Balatanya, who was the Talmud of the Maggid. So he writes in Parshas Bahaloischa, Likutei Torah, Daf Lamed Aleph, he says as follows. Acha Iker, the main thing is there should be unity. I should not focus and see the negativity of my friend. Meaning, you have to realize that there's something called a menorah. L'mayla. Spiritually, there's a candelabra, and it's made of 1 piece of gold. It's not made of many pieces. And what do you take? You take a hammer, and you hammer out the gold, and suddenly, 1 piece that was before connected to another piece as part of one achdus, one unity, 1 piece now became the top of the menorah, and 1 piece became the leg of the menorah. Yurecha, the base of the menorah, the 3 legs. 1 part became a perach, a beautiful flower, and 1 became a becher, a goblet. 1 part became the base, and 1 part became the container where you're going to put the wick. But what was it? It was literally 1 piece. It was 1 miksha. There was no distinction in the big block of gold. It was 1 piece. But they hammered it out, and there was now this whole ma'aracha that happened. He says, Ha'elyon yerid lamata, ha'tachton oila lamayla. 1 part of it, the elyon, the one that was on top could go down when it was hammered out, and the one on bottom can go up. What does this mean spiritually? Hara yored lepamim lamata v'nichnas ba'adam ra ulehepech hasiyas ezem mitzvah me'adam ra lepamim oila lamayla v'noitel acher. What happens is sometimes there's a confusion. Sometimes negativity could go down into 1 person, and the mitzvah of a person who you would call a bad person, an adam ra, is absorbed by somebody else. V'chol adam tzarich litlis hachisarim boy v'hatoiv shaloi shemohu me'acher sha'ala l'mayla v'ra'as acherim shemohu shaloi she'yorad l'mata. So he says this is how you have to look at life. I look at myself, I say, I have this quality that is so good. I look at that person, the other person, and I say, he has or she has a quality that is so negative, that is so disheartening, that is so aggravating. Says the Balatanya, it's Miksha. And you never know. It may be that you're seeing the reverse of reality. It may be the toiv that you're seeing in yourself is that person's toiv. But in the process of Miksha, that good went up. And it could be the ra that you see in the other person. It may be my ra. It may be my own negativity. But our relationships are deeper than we imagine. We're not only connected socially. We're not only connected because we may daven in the same shul or meet at the same bar mitzvah. And there's so many people we're not connected. When you see the world from a larger, bigger picture, you see the miksha, and then you realize that we're all connected as not just a commercial, it's not just an ad for the telephone, or used to be an ad, but it's a very genuine idea. So it may be the toiv that I'm giving myself so much credit for. It's really yours. It's really that person that I'm not very fond of. Elamai, in the spiritual process of miksha, of hammering out, your good went into me. And my ra, my struggles, your tension, your ra is my tension. It's my issues. And went into this person. So I'm looking at you, I'm getting upset. I'm looking at myself and I'm complimenting myself. Really, it should be the other way. I should look at myself and get upset, look at you and be complimentary, because there's a mixture. He says, V'yaz yeh be'emes echad hayorech im aprachim. And then they'll become one, the base with the flowers. I could see myself as a base and you as a flower. You could see yourself as a base and me as a flower, realizing that even though I feel like the flower and you feel like the base, or conversely, it may be Miksha. And only then does Aaron HaKoyen have the power to kindle the flame of all seven. He is the Kohen Gadol, Rav Chesed, he includes all the Chasadim. Only then can he do it. Only when there is this recognition of Miksha, of oneness, is there a kosher menorah, and then he can light all of the seven candles. This story I heard from a grandson. A shul near where I grew up on Montgomery Street, not far from here, in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. There's a shul on New York Avenue near Empire called Beis David Gershon. And the Rav there for many years has been Rabbi Chaim Rubin, who's an Einekul of the Divrei Chaim, Rabbi Chaim Halberstam, the Helike Sanzer Rov, known as the Divrei Chaim. The Divrei Chaim, the Sanzer Rov, was born in Tov Kuf Nun Zayin, 1797, and he passed away Nisan, Chafei Nisan, I think Tov Reish Lamed Vav, which would be 1876. Rabbi Reuben, who's named after the Divrei Chaim, his Zayda, told me, he says, I'm going to tell you the story. You might think I'm exaggerating, so I'll tell you. I heard it from my mother, who heard it from her mother, who heard it from her grandmother, who heard it from the woman herself. And he said, my mother would tell it to me, b'shem her mother, b'shem her grandmother, b'shem the woman it happened to. And as he tells me the story, he was weeping profusely. And I asked him, why are you weeping? And he said, when my mother told the story, she was weeping. And she told me that when her mother told it, and when her grandmother said, she was weeping profusely. And therefore, whenever he says it, he weeps. What's the story? This is how I heard it from him. The Helike Divrei Chaim, the Sanzer Rov, as a 15-year-old, was already known across Poland as a great mind, an extraordinary mind, and a great heart. He became one of the greatest masters and spiritual leaders of Eastern European Jewry during his generation. The Helike Sanzer Rov. One of the great Goinim and rabbis in Poland at the time was known as the Baruch Tam, the author of the Baruch Tam, Reb Baruch Frankel Tu'umim, known as the Baruch Tam, who had a daughter. His daughter's name was Rachel Feiga. Rachel Feiga was known as, to use my father's phrase, the Krasavitsa. She was known as the Esther Hamalka of Poland, an exceptional young woman. In Gashmius, in Ruchnius, something extraordinary. Her father was the Baruch Tam, was a great man, and he was looking for an appropriate shidduch, an appropriate match for Rachel Feiga, whose beauty inside and out was something, they said, unparalleled. So he himself went and started the search. So you know the process in those days, and in some places still the process, although it's a little different today probably. He goes to the yeshivas, and he becomes one of the best yeshivas, and he hears who's the best of the best. Rosh Yeshiva tells him, no question, 15-year-old Chaim Halberstam. And he goes, he's sitting in Beis Medrash, he meets him, talks to him for a while, 2 hours, or whatever the time was. Of course, he tests him. He scrutinizes his mind. He examines him. He studies with him. He delves into the young person's mind, and he realizes that Ein Kemaisa, a real Metzia. He's a gem of gems. And right there, things were somewhat less complicated then. Right there and then he says, you know, I have a daughter, Rachel Fege. You two would be a great shidduch. The young man, he wasn't known as a Divrei Chaim, but he was known as Chaim. But the young Reb Chaim agrees. They make a tkiyah skaf with the hands, an agreement. Mazel tov, the shidduch is sealed. He comes home. The Baruch Tam comes home, gives the good news to the Rebbetzin, his wife, to the Kala, Rachel Fege. Mazel tov, the best of the best. His wife tells him, Aishik Sheda, you know, you can't mamish agree with your husband. She says, I don't understand. You speak to a guy 2 hours and that's it? Look at him, see him in different... You sat in the Beis Medrash, do you even know what he looks like? Do you even know what the guy looks like? He said, I sat with him, I saw his face. Send 2 Bachrim to check him out. So the Baruch Tam sends 2 of the older, more mature students to check out Reb Chaim and give him the second report. He was, of course, confident that the report would even be more promising than what he saw with his own eyes. They go, and they come back, they return, and they spend some more time with him. But they also waited till the Seder was over. And Chaim Halberstam got up to walk out. And they, of course, observed that he had a terrible, terrible limp. He was lame, and he had a terrible limp. So they come back to the Baruch Tam and they say, his Ga'oinus is unquestionable. His Yirah Shamayim is non-debatable. But you realized that he has a terrible limp. Now, Rachel Fege, physically, was an exceptional figure. And the Baruch Tam didn't realize. He spoke to Chaim sitting. You don't see the limp. You're sitting, everybody's anyway bent over and hunchback on the Gemara. You know, you got to be that way. And it has an effect after a couple of years. He didn't think. He wasn't thinking. You know, look how he walked. I mean, this is important, but in his world, you know, he didn't. Let me see how he walks. Let me see if he walks this way, that way. You know, he walks straight, walks crooked, the leg there, everything that's involved in how you walk. And he hears this abrach. He was so aggravated, he couldn't forgive himself. On one hand, he was a big Rav. He made a tkiyah skaf. They announced the day of the wedding. Everything was good. They already sent messages to the mechatonim. Things were getting organized. And now he hears this. What do you do? On one hand, he can't do this to his daughter. It's unfair. But on the other hand, he felt that it would be very unfair to the chassan. Some time later, the future son-in-law comes to visit his father-in-law, the Baruch Tam. And now, when he walks through the door of his Beis Medrash or his shul, he sees himself, everything. He goes home, and the poor man, the Baruch Tam, is shattered. He's devastated. He's broken. His wife can't forgive him. You can imagine. His daughter is deeply... It was a very tragic situation. The right thing seemed to cut off the shidduch. It's not Rachel Fege's fault that he made the shidduch. On the other hand, he just felt so trapped. Reb Chaim comes to meet him. And right away, he sits down with him and he says, I understand. The thing was a mekach tos. You didn't know what you're getting into. Don't worry. If you want to obliterate the shidduch, you have my full permission. There's no hard feelings. You have the moral authority to do it. You simply did not know the facts. And that's called a mekach tos. It was based on a misconception. A misrepresentation of the facts. All I ask of you is, before you break up the shidduch and I'm ready to leave, and there's no hard feelings, allow me some time with the bride, with the kala. He called her the kala, Rachel Fege. In those days, in those cities, with those people, this was not a common behavior. The breaking up the shidduch. What are you going to go spend time with her alone? It didn't seem appropriate. But he respected the young man. He knew a lot about him. So therefore, he said, no problem. And Reb Chaim went in to a room with the young woman, Rachel Feiga. His Einikl tells me what he heard from his mother, heard from her mother, heard from the grandmother, or heard it from Rebbetzin Rachel Feiga. Reb Chaim Sanzer asks her to go over to a mirror. And she goes over to a mirror. And she takes a look into the mirror, and she sees that from an erect person, a body with full stature, erect, healthy, shapely, she herself seemed in the mirror lame and hinkedik, limp, with a limp. So she cried out in dread and in horror. She gave a scream. So Reb Chaim said, don't worry, come back. And she leaves the mirror and she takes a look at herself, and she's the same Rachel Feiga as she was a moment ago. And then he sits down with her and he says, so now let me explain to you the story. Before I was born, they announced, the Gemara says in Masechta Saita, the beginning of Beis, they announced, Arboyim Yoim Kodim Yitziris Avlat. There's a lot of announcements in heaven. Bas ploini leploini, bas ploini leploini. Right? So they announced, Rachel Feiga leploini Chaim Alberstein. I took a look at your soul, and I saw that it's a type of soul that is destined to enclose itself in a maimed, blemished body. In a body that will be lame, in a body that will have a terrible limp. I saw. So I asked the Rebbeinu Shalom. I said, do me a favor. She's my soulmate. It's two halves of one soul. Give me that body. Allow my soul to take the challenges of her body. Allow my unblemished body to be given to her. That moment she stood up, she left the room, and she said, Tata, Mama, Mazel Tov, das ist mein Chassan. Mazel Tov, this is my groom. And indeed, everybody knows that Reb Chaim Sanzer had a terrible limp. He was lame. Rachel Feiga was a very different physical nature. So I take a look at my spouse, you take a look at your spouse, and you see that there's something about them that may be driving you insane, that may be aggravating you terribly. There's something about them that is really irking you. They say there was once a Yid who did not stop speaking in his sleep. He would always give drush, not just speak. A lot of people talk in their sleep. He would give sermons in his sleep. Once, after 30 years, his wife wakes up in the middle of the night and says, Yankel, it's 30 years, efshe schweigst du. One night, be quiet. He says, darling, if you would let me talk during the day, I'll be quiet during the night. That's one way, or it can go in the other direction. A wife looks at her husband, and there's something that really irks her. And it's something that's not temporary. Sometimes it may be consistent. It may be either a deep challenge or a superficial challenge. That's kol chad lefim shura delay. Our natural instinct is, why do I have to deal with this? Why me? Why do I have to deal with this? And in a special moment of grace, quote unquote, you really let her hear it, or you let him hear it. Comes the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya, and says, it's Miksha. It's not so simple. You may never know. That challenge that your spouse is dealing with may have been your challenge. It may be your tension. It may be your problem. It may be your own ra. And who knows if her soul did not accept upon herself that challenge to make it easier for you, or his soul didn't accept upon himself that challenge to make it easier for her. So instead of looking at her, looking at him and say, I can't deal with this anymore, I have to stop and ask myself the question, maybe I can't be thankful enough for the fact that you accepted this upon yourself, so I should be able to have an easier life. And therefore, instead of getting angry, upset, deranged, insane, furious, I should see myself minimally saying, I'm a partner. How can I be of help? Let's work this through together. Maybe it's really my work that you accepted upon yourself. Minimally, let me be a partner. We're in this together. What do they say about Rabbi Jacobson, the tzaddik of Yerushalayim, that once his wife had a foot illness and they came to the doctor. He came with her to the doctor and he says, my wife's foot is hurting us. My wife's foot is hurting us. This is true in a marriage where it is plagufa, where it's miksha. This is what a marriage is. It's one soul split into two. So it's mamish miksha. When it's miksha, you don't know your thing, your part. Like in a menorah, you have one piece of silver, one part goes here, one part goes there. Her toiv went into you, your ra went into her, the other way around. The same is true in a more expansive way. Klal Yisroel, which is also on a Shammai, it's the same miksha. I look at somebody's negativity, I said, this person I can't deal with. It may be something within me that went to him. It's really mine. And the toiv in me, maybe his toiv that went into me. Miksha. There is that continuous integration. Therefore, when I say, I want regelachas, I just want that stability and consistency, I'm out of sync with reality. The reality is that there is a dynamic, there is a flow, there is a give and take. There is a connection between me and you, between you and me, between me and my loved ones, between me and my spouse, and me and family, friends, and between people I may not know. But there is a mixture, there's a dynamic connection. And therefore your nefillah may affect me, and your aliyah may affect me. And when you have a nefillah, I have a nefillah because I now need to help you out in that situation. Or conversely. And that's the way. That's the deeper, the more powerful, more potent approach to look at such a moment in your life. And when you're having such a nefillah, when you get into a difficult mood, when you have your downers, the function, the purpose of every single downer is to go and to bring back a treasure that has been lost. And if you would not be able to experience that downer, you would never be able to have access to that oitzer. Only by experiencing this downer can you go into a place of concealment, to a place of darkness. But in the darkness, there are also sparks. In the darkness, there's also a treasure. If you would not experience the darkness, you never have access to the treasure. Now that I have Vayhi Erev in my life, I have darkness in my life, whatever that darkness may be, one form or another form. Now I am in that world, and I can, from there, elevate things that people, things, souls, sparks, ideas, concepts, realities that I could have never, ever elevated before. And this is also true in our personal lives, also true with our children. Sometimes you look at your child, and the child goes through difficult situations that demand from us to go down out of our comfort zone, out of our box, and try to be creative with situations. And you say, I want regelachas. I just want my home should be serene, stable, consistent. I come home. There should be beautiful classical music in the background, and everyone should be speaking like this. And when Tati says it's time to get into the bath, everyone jumps into the bath, bebas achas. By 8:45, it's silent in the home. It's mamash sheket. It's like an Eden hatachten, and I can sit back on the couch and read my book for the next 3 hours, and no one has any tinus and minus. That's fiction. That's imagination. That's good for after 120 years. The only house, the only family, the only marriage that I know that is perfect is the one I don't know well enough. And you come in and you see, but there's nefillas, there's aliyahs, there's yeridus. Of course, we don't try to jump. We don't try for yeridus. And you don't say, okay, today I want to be in a bad mood. But it's really not our choice always. But those are the moments when your child is going through something. There is a very deep treasure there. There's a very deep opportunity there. There's a very deep spark there. There's a very deep divine gift there. And that means that I have to go down. I have to endure some of the pain. But when I endure it, if I do it with courage and with a higher perspective, knowing that I'm on a mission to bring back treasures to the king, then ultimately no darkness will derail me and no obstacles will deter me, because I know that even if it's camouflaged, at that moment my relationship with my Father in heaven may be the deepest. Have a wonderful evening.